I want you to picture a Tuesday morning in August, 1882, Cheyenne Springs, Wyoming territory. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and the horses hang their heads. The kind of town built on two things, dust and hard choices. Now, on a Tuesday like this, the heat isn't even the problem. The problem is what's happening in the town square. A wagon has rolled in, a big, dark-painted thing with Pre-Wit Mercy House, stenciled on the side in faded gold letters. And standing on a splintered wooden platform, scrubbed pink with lye soap until their skin looks raw, are 12 children. Ranging from maybe 4 years old to 13, they're wearing their best clothes, which aren't very good. They are standing very, very still. In those days, they called it placement. They put it in the papers. Orphan Placement Day sounded almost hopeful, like a church social. But if you had eyes, if you had a heart still ticking in your chest, you knew what it was. It was a sale. It was a market, and those children were the goods on the shelf. One by one they go. A farmer takes a strong-backed boy of 12. A widow takes a small girl who looks like she won't eat much. The crowd is not cruel exactly. They are just practical. That was the word people used back then, when they didn't want to feel the weight of what they were doing. Practical. Then the auctioneer gets to number 7 and number 8. A thin girl, 10 years old, with a jaw set like she was carved out of granite. Her name is Lena, and standing behind her, with both of his small hands gripping the back of her dress, the way a drowning man grips a rope, is her little brother. Noah, 6 years old, big, quiet, dark eyes that have already seen more than any 6-year-old should ever have to see. The bidding starts, and then, right in the middle of it, a butcher from the north end of town raises his hand for the girl. Just the girl. The boy is small, see? Too small to be useful for another year at least. Not practical. The auctioneer nods and opens his mouth to split them up. And that 10-year-old girl does something that stops the blood cold in every single person standing in that square. She drops to her knees in the dirt. Right there. On that splintered platform, in front of God and the whole town, she drops down, and she looks up at the auctioneer with eyes that are absolutely dry, because Lena had learned, in whatever life she'd had before that platform, that crying doesn't work, and she says, take me instead of him. I will work for 3 people. I will work every hour you want. I won't complain, I won't ask for anything. Just, please, don't leave him behind. The yard goes dead silent. A man standing at the far edge of the crowd who nobody was really paying attention to, because he is the kind of man who has made himself very easy not to notice. Dust-colored coat. Hat pulled low. Shoulders that look like they're carrying something that isn't luggage. He reaches into his coat pocket. He walks forward through the crowd. People step aside without quite knowing why, and he sets every last cent he owns on that table. $15. He looks the auctioneer dead in the eye and says, quiet as a closing door, both of them. I'm taking both. His name is Daniel Hart, and right now, none of you know who he is yet. But you will. Now, before we go any further, I need you to understand something about Daniel Hart, because if you don't understand him, none of the rest of this story will mean what it means. 2 years before that August morning, a fever came through Cheyenne Springs. That wasn't unusual. Fever came through every few years, like a tax collector. It took what it took and moved on. But this one was worse than most. And in the space of a single terrible night, it took Daniel Hart's wife, Sarah, and his 7-year-old son, Samuel. He buried them in the same pine box. He dug the hole himself. And when it was done, something inside Daniel Hart, some essential, living part of him, went into that hole along with them. And he'd spent the 2 years since then trying very hard to feel as little as possible. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He didn't fight or rage or crumble publicly, because that was not his way. He just got smaller, quieter. He went to town only when he needed nails or lamp oil, spoke only as many words as the transaction required, and he drove home alone and sat on his porch and watched the dark come in. He couldn't look at a child, couldn't even glance at one across a street eye without a black, bottomless grief rising up in his chest like floodwater. So what was he doing in that crowd? He went for nails and lamp oil. That's the truth of it. He wasn't looking for this. He had no plan, no room made up, no idea in the world what he was about to do. But then he saw Noah. He saw a 6-year-old boy staring at the floorboards of that platform with his hands balled up at his sides. And it was the exact precise way, the exact posture, the exact grip of those small hands that Samuel used to stand when he was scared. And something in Daniel Hart's frozen chest didn't break so much as it cracked. Just a crack. Barely anything at all, but enough. He loaded them into his wagon like they were made of something fragile. He didn't speak much. He didn't touch them. Daniel Hart understood. The way a man understands something he's learned the hard way. That you don't reach for a scared animal. You let it come to you. You earn it. As the sun dropped orange and heavy over the Laramie Fork, Lena looked at him from her side of the wagon with those dry, measuring eyes. She had been assessing him since the moment he set that money down, calculating the risk. Finally, she spoke. "If you hit him," she said, steady as a post driven into hard ground, "I will kill you in your sleep." Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't get angry. He just looked at the road ahead and said, "I believe you, Miss Lena." And that was more than she had expected from him. It might have been the most honest thing any adult had ever said to her. That first night at the farmhouse, Daniel Hart did a series of small things. But I want you to understand that for those 2 children, they were not small things. They were enormous. He gave Lena her own room. Not a corner. Not a pallet. A room with a door that closed. He showed her the bolt on the inside of that door. And he said, and this is important, he didn't ask her to trust him. He didn't say, "Don't worry, you're safe." He just showed her the bolt was there. And then he took his bedroll and his rifle and he went out onto the porch. It poured that night. A cold, soaking, relentless drenching. And through her window, Lena watched him. He was sitting in that rocking chair in the full dark, soaked down to his boots, and he was not moving. He was just there, guarding the door from the outside. Not making her feel watched. Not making her feel trapped. Making her feel, maybe for the first time, like there was a wall between her and the world that she hadn't built herself. By morning, she hadn't slept. But she had thought about it, a lot. Noah took longer. He was younger, which you'd think would make it easier. But grief and fear in a small child runs deeper and quieter than people expect. He didn't speak. He hadn't spoken a word in 7 months. The Mercy House staff had put it in the papers. Mute or near mute. Manageable, like it was a feature of an animal for sale. But Lena knew. He wasn't mute. He was just done. When the Buckner family rode over a few days later to have a look at the new situation, Noah had disappeared under the porch. Daniel didn't call for him. Didn't drag him out. Didn't apologize to the Buckners. He just sat down on the porch steps with a cup of coffee and waited. After about 20 minutes, he started talking. Not to Noah specifically, just talking about the weather. About a hawk he'd seen that morning over the east field. About how his old dog, Chester, used to sleep under that same porch during thunderstorms. From under the boards, between the slats, Noah's eyes watched him the whole time. That evening, Daniel laid out what he called the rules of this house. He did it at the dinner table. Plain and direct, like it was information they needed and not a lecture. Rule 1, nobody hits nobody. Not hands, not belts, not words said the wrong way. Nobody. Rule 2, nobody goes hungry. Rule 3, nobody lies. Not to him, not to each other, not to themselves. Chores weren't rules, he told them. Chores were just life. Everybody pulled, everybody gained. That was the deal on this land and on most honest land. For Lena and Noah, who had spent years with a price on their heads, and terms attached to their existence, hearing the word deal instead of payment, hearing it come from a man who sat in the rain all night rather than make them feel unsafe, it landed differently than rules usually do. It landed like something that might be true. Silas Prewitt was not a man who liked losing his inventory. That was the word he used. By the way, inventory. The man ran the Mercy House the way another man might run. A livestock operation, and he had the paperwork, the county connections, and the practiced smile of someone who had gotten away with things for a very long time. He showed up 4 days ahead of his scheduled inspection, which was not an accident. He brought with him a sheriff named Gideon Rath, who was his cousin by marriage and his instrument by arrangement. And he walked into Daniel Hart's house the way a man walks into a room he already owns. He poked through the laundry. He made observations about the sleeping, arrangements that were designed to sound like concerns. He looked at Daniel's face, the grief still living in it, the tiredness, and he said, slow and satisfied, that it was clear this man was not in the proper emotional condition to be responsible for children. He looked at Lena. The way he looked at Lena made Daniel's hand move, just slightly. Just once it toward the Winchester on the wall. Then Prewitt announced that the placement was unsuitable, and that the children would be returned to the Mercy House pending reassignment. He nodded to Sheriff Rath. The sheriff put his hand near his holster. The air on that porch got very heavy. Daniel Hart looked at Silas Prewitt for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to something low and unmistakable. Not loud. Not hot, but carrying the absolute weight of a man who has already decided. You, he said, are not taking a single blessed thing off this porch. The sheriff started to say something. The standoff hung there in the August heat, brittle as dry wood. And then the screen door creaked open. It was Noah. Little silent, 7 months quiet Noah. He was standing in the doorway, in his bare feet with his hands at his sides. Lena moved toward him immediately, reaching out, saying, "No, Noah. Go back inside." But Noah looked at his sister, and then he looked at Silas Prewitt. And the dam broke. Not with a flood. Not with screaming. With a small, steady, terrible 6-year-old voice that had been holding the truth, like a stone for 7 months. He pointed his finger at Prewitt. "Don't," he said. "Don't let him take her back." He took her to the back room at the Mercy House. He made her cry. He said if I told anybody, he would put me in the cellar with the rats, and nobody would believe me anyway. I will not dress up what that silence felt like. It felt like sickness. The deep, cold, bottom-of-the-stomach kind that doesn't go away with time. Every adult on that porch heard a 6-year-old boy describe, in plain, child's words and what Silas Prewitt was. Sheriff Gideon Rath looked at his cousin by marriage. He looked at him for a long time. And what he saw, standing there in the daylight on Daniel Hart's porch, was not a respectable businessman. It was a monster in a good coat. The game was over. Prewitt was hauled off in his own buggy, raging and promising consequences. And for a while, it did look like there would be consequences. Because Prewitt had friends in the territory, had paperwork, had 15 years of building something that looked official. Daniel Hart had $15 worth of placement papers and 2 children who no court had formally assigned to him. He was about to go up against the entire territory. And he wasn't going to back down an inch. Monday morning, the courtroom in Cheyenne Springs was packed from wall to wall. Every farmer and every mother in that county had heard what Noah said on that porch, and they had come to bear witness. Because that's what communities do sometimes, when they finally see clearly. Judge Harlan Hollister was 63 years old, and that spring he had buried his own granddaughter. He had gone back to work 3 weeks later, because that was the only thing he knew how to do. But something in him was permanently and quietly different. He had the look of a man who no longer had patience for anything that wasn't the truth. Lena testified first. She was 10 years old and she spoke to that courtroom, the same way she spoke on that auction platform, and without tears, without decoration, with the plain and devastating language of someone who has given up, hoping that softening things will help. She described the back room at the Mercy House. She described being told it was a test that all the children had to pass. She described being told that if she told anyone, Noah would be sent away and she would never see him again. The courtroom was very still. Then Judge Hollister looked down at Noah, who was seated in the front row between Daniel Hart and Lena. The judge was wise enough not to put him on the stand. He just leaned forward. He looked at the boy directly, the way you look at someone whose answer actually matters. And he asked one question. "Son, where do you want to live?" The whole room held its breath. Noah didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the lawyers or the crowded room or the high windows letting in the morning light. He looked at the man in the front row with the calloused hands and the tired eyes and the dust-colored coat, the man who sat in the rain. And Noah said, "Home." One word. The gavel came down like a bolt of lightning hitting dry ground. Judge Hollister didn't just uphold the placement. He granted the adoption right there, on the spot, in open court, which was not common and not small. He signed the papers himself. And when he handed them to Daniel, he looked at him and said, I believe this is the most important sentence in this entire story. You went in for nails. You came out with a family? Try not to waste it. Lena didn't walk out of that courtroom. She ran. She covered the distance between the gallery and the front row in about 4 strides. And she hit Daniel Hart's chest hard enough that he nearly went over backward. He caught her. He held on. And for the first time in 2 years, in that packed, creaking Wyoming courtroom, Daniel Hart held something he was absolutely, completely not willing to lose. And whether it was grief leaving or love arriving or both at the same time, I cannot tell you which it was. And I suspect he couldn't either. He put his arms around those 2 children, and he didn't let go for a long time. Silas Prewitt died in a prison cell in 1912, 30 years later. Not a soul came to claim the body. His name is not on any building, any street, any record that anyone keeps with any pride. It has already been forgotten by history, which is exactly the kind of justice that doesn't make headlines, but is the most permanent kind there is. But the names Prewitt tried to erase, those lived. Noah Hart grew up to be a schoolteacher. He taught for 31 years at the Cheyenne Springs Elementary School, the very building raised on the same ground where the Mercy House once stood. He married Margaret Rath, the daughter of Sheriff Gideon Rath, who turned out to be the right kind of man at exactly the right moment. They had 4 children. The youngest son they named Samuel, after the boy Daniel had lost, after the boy Noah had never met but had, in a roundabout way, saved his life. Lena Hart became the first licensed female attorney in the Wyoming Territory. She spent her career, 40 years of it, in courtrooms, very much like the one where a judge asked her brother one question and changed everything. She fought for children, the ones nobody wanted, the ones the system had decided were inconvenient, the ones that the word practical was being used to abandon. She never married. People asked over the years. She always said the same thing. I watched a real man sit in the rain all night for a couple of strangers he'd known for 6 hours. I wasn't about to settle for anything less than that. And I'm still not. Daniel Hart died in 1918 in that same farmhouse. He was 61 years old. He died in his own bed, in the house he had built with his hands, with a daughter's hand in his left and a son's hand in his right. He went to town for nails and lamp oil. He came home with a reason to breathe. And if you are sitting here listening to me tell you this story, if some part of you is sitting a little straighter, or holding whoever is next to you a little tighter, or thinking about someone you maybe haven't called in a while, then you already understand what $15 and a cracked open heart can do. You already understand the whole thing.